In the early 14th century, long before European explorers crossed the Atlantic and centuries before the rise of modern global empires, there existed in West Africa a kingdom so wealthy that its riches astonished the known world. This kingdom was the Empire of Mali. And at the height of its power ruled a man whose name would become legendary, Mansa Musa. He was not simply a king. He was a scholar, a builder, a pilgrim, and the wealthiest ruler the medieval world had ever seen. Even today, historians often refer to him as the richest person in recorded history. But the story of Mansa Musa is not only about wealth. It is a story of faith, knowledge, power, diplomacy, and the transformation of an empire. To understand Mansa Musa, we must first understand the world he was born into. The Mali Empire rose in West Africa in the 1200s after the fall of the earlier Ghana Empire. Its foundation is tied to one of the most famous figures in African history, Sundiata Keita. Sundiata, often called the Lion King of Mali, united several Mandinka kingdoms and defeated the powerful Sasso ruler Semanguru Kante around the year 1235. After his victory, Sundiata built a powerful empire centered along the Niger River. This river was the lifeline of the region. It provided fertile land for agriculture and served as a major trade route linking the forests of West Africa with the deserts of the Sahara. Through this network of trade routes flowed some of the most valuable resources in the medieval world. Gold, salt, ivory, kola nuts, and enslaved people moved through these routes in enormous quantities. The gold fields of Bambuk and Beret, located within Mali's sphere of influence, produced enormous quantities of gold. In fact, at the time, West Africa supplied a significant portion of the world's gold. Caravans of merchants crossed the Sahara Desert carrying salt from the north and returning with gold from the south. These trade routes connected Mali to the great cities of the Islamic world, places like Cairo, Mecca, Baghdad, and Damascus. By the time Mansa Musa was born, Mali was already wealthy and powerful. But under his rule, it would become the most famous empire in Africa. Mansa Musa was born around 1280, though the exact date remains uncertain. His full name was Musa Keita. The title Mansa means emperor or king of kings in the Mandinka language. He belonged to the Keita dynasty, the royal family founded by Sundiata Keita. Little is known about Musa's childhood, but historians believe he was raised in a royal environment where leadership, diplomacy, and religion were highly valued. Islam had already begun spreading across West Africa through trade and scholarship. Many rulers of Mali were Muslims, although traditional African spiritual practices continued to exist alongside Islam. Musa likely received education in Islamic law, the Arabic language, governance, trade systems, and military leadership. These skills would later help him manage one of the largest empires in Africa. The way Mansa Musa came to power is unusual. Before him ruled a king named Mansa Abu Bakr II. According to historical accounts, Abu Bakr became fascinated with the idea of exploring the Atlantic Ocean. He believed that lands existed beyond the western horizon. In an extraordinary decision, he reportedly assembled a massive fleet of ships and sailed westward into the Atlantic, hoping to discover what lay beyond. The expedition never returned. Before leaving, Abu Bakr placed Musa in charge of the empire as deputy ruler. When the emperor failed to return, Musa officially became Mansa of Mali around 1312. Suddenly, the responsibility of ruling one of the largest empires in Africa fell upon him. But Musa proved to be far more than a caretaker ruler. He would become one of the greatest leaders in African history. At its height under Musa, the Mali Empire stretched across vast areas of West Africa. It included territories that today form parts of Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. This territory covered thousands of miles and contained millions of people from many ethnic groups and cultures. Important cities within the empire included Niani, the capital; Timbuktu, a major center of learning and trade; Gao, an important commercial hub; and Jen, famous for commerce and architecture. Musa ruled this enormous territory through a system of governors and local chiefs who reported to the imperial court. Trade taxes, gold production, and agricultural wealth filled the royal treasury. But Musa did not simply collect wealth. He invested it into religion, education, and architecture. Mansa Musa was a deeply devoted Muslim. Islam had reached West Africa through trans-Saharan trade centuries earlier, and by Musa's time it was firmly rooted among merchants and scholars. However, Musa took his religious devotion further than any previous Malian ruler. He prayed regularly, supported Islamic scholars, and followed the teachings of the Quran. One of the most important duties for a Muslim ruler is performing the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. For many Muslims, the journey is once in a lifetime. But Musa would turn this pilgrimage into one of the most extraordinary journeys in world history. In the year 1324, Mansa Musa began the journey that would make him famous across 3 continents. The Hajj required traveling from West Africa across the Sahara Desert to Egypt and then onward to Mecca. But Musa did not travel like an ordinary pilgrim. He traveled like an emperor. Historical records from Arab historians describe an enormous caravan accompanying him. It included around 60,000 people, including soldiers, court officials, servants, merchants, scholars, and musicians. Among them were thousands of attendants carrying bars of gold. Hundreds of camels traveled with the caravan, each loaded with large amounts of gold dust. The caravan stretched for miles across the desert. Wherever they passed, people stared in amazement. Never had such a wealthy ruler traveled through their lands. The most famous moment of Musa's journey occurred when he reached Cairo in Egypt. At that time, Cairo was one of the greatest cities in the Islamic world and was ruled by the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad. When Musa entered the city, his generosity shocked everyone. He distributed so much gold to the people of Cairo that the price of gold in the city fell dramatically. Markets were flooded with Malian gold, and historians believe the economic effects lasted for many years. This event revealed to the wider world just how rich the Mali Empire truly was. People across the Mediterranean began asking about this powerful kingdom from the western lands of Africa. During his stay in Cairo, Musa met with the Sultan. According to custom, visitors were expected to bow and kiss the ground before the Sultan as a sign of respect. Musa initially refused, explaining that he would bow only before God. Eventually a compromise was reached, and the meeting proceeded peacefully. From Cairo, Musa continued his journey to the Arabian Peninsula and eventually arrived in the holy city of Mecca. There he completed the sacred rituals of the Hajj along with thousands of other pilgrims from across the Islamic world. But Musa's journey did not end with prayer. While in the Middle East, he spent time meeting scholars, learning from religious teachers, and deepening his knowledge of Islamic law and scholarship. He also began inviting scholars, teachers, and architects to return with him to Mali. Among those who accompanied him back was a well-known architect named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili. When Musa returned to Mali, he began an ambitious program of building and cultural development. One of the cities that benefited the most from his vision was Timbuktu. Before Musa's reign, Timbuktu was already an important trading town located along trans-Saharan trade routes. But under Musa's patronage it became one of the greatest centers of learning in the medieval world. He financed the construction of mosques, schools, and libraries. The Sankor Mosque became a famous center of education and eventually formed part of what is now known as the University of Timbuktu. Students and scholars traveled from many regions of Africa and the Middle East to study there. Subjects taught in Timbuktu included mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, theology, geography, and literature. Over time, the city became home to vast collections of handwritten manuscripts, preserving centuries of scholarship. Mansa Musa also supported architectural projects across his empire. Mosques were built in Timbuktu, Gao, and other important cities. These buildings were often constructed using sun-dried mud bricks, a material perfectly suited to the climate of the Sahel region. Their distinctive style included wooden support beams and elegant geometric forms. Some of these historic structures remain standing even today, serving as reminders of the rich cultural heritage of the Mali Empire. Beyond religion and education, Musa also strengthened the political structure of his empire. He organized the vast territory into provinces governed by officials who were responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and managing local affairs. Trade routes were protected by imperial forces to ensure safe passage for merchants traveling across the empire. This stability encouraged commerce and allowed Mali's economy to flourish. The empire's wealth rested largely on two vital resources: gold and salt. Gold came from mines located in southern regions of the empire. Salt came from desert mines in the Sahara, particularly the famous mines of Tagaza. Salt was extremely valuable in West Africa because it was necessary for preserving food and maintaining health. In some regions it was so valuable that it was traded weight for weight with gold. By controlling both gold production and key trade routes, Mali became one of the richest empires in the world. The fame of Mansa Musa spread far beyond Africa. In 1375, European mapmakers created a famous map known as the Catalan Atlas. On this map appears an image of a crowned African king seated on a throne, holding a large piece of gold in his hand. That king is Mansa Musa. For Europeans who saw the map, he represented the immense wealth of Africa. Stories about the riches of Mali circulated widely and helped shape European curiosity about the African continent for generations. Mansa Musa ruled for roughly 25 years, during which the Mali Empire reached its greatest height. Cities grew larger, trade expanded, and centers of learning flourished. His reign helped connect West Africa more closely with the intellectual and commercial networks of the wider Islamic world. Mansa Musa eventually passed away around the year 1337. Although the exact date is uncertain, historians agree that his death marked the end of a remarkable era. After his death, his successors attempted to maintain the power of the empire, but over time Mali gradually weakened. New powers eventually rose in the region, particularly the Songhai Empire. Yet the legacy of Mansa Musa endured. He left behind great cities, thriving centers of scholarship, monumental architecture, and a reputation that spread across continents. Most importantly, his story demonstrates that medieval Africa contained powerful states, advanced economies, and rich intellectual traditions long before colonial narratives attempted to portray the continent otherwise. Today, historians continue to study the manuscripts of Timbuktu and the history of the Mali Empire. And through that work, the legacy of Mansa Musa, the Golden Emperor of Mali, continues to shine across the centuries. And so the story of Mansa Musa does not end with his death. In many ways it begins there. Centuries have passed since the Golden Emperor of Mali walked the deserts of the Sahara, prayed in the holy city of Mecca, and built centers of learning in the heart of West Africa. Empires have risen and fallen. Cities have changed. Maps have been redrawn countless times. Yet the name Mansa Musa continues to echo through history. His life reminds us that the story of the world has never belonged to one continent or one civilization alone. At a time when much of Europe was still emerging from the early medieval period, powerful kingdoms and empires thrived across Africa. Trade routes stretched across deserts and oceans. Scholars debated philosophy and science. Libraries preserved knowledge that would influence generations. The cities of Timbuktu, Gao, and Jen stood as beacons of learning and commerce. Their mosques, markets, and universities welcomed travelers, merchants, and students from across Africa and the wider Islamic world. In their libraries rested thousands of manuscripts, works of theology, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry, and law, written by scholars whose names are still being rediscovered today. Mansa Musa helped make that world possible. His pilgrimage across the Sahara was more than a display of wealth. It was a declaration that the Mali Empire was part of a vast and connected world. Through diplomacy, trade, and scholarship, he linked West Africa to Cairo, to Mecca, and to the intellectual centers of the Middle East. Wherever his caravan traveled, stories followed. Stories of an emperor whose camels carried gold like grain. Stories of a ruler so generous that entire cities spoke of him for decades. Stories of a kingdom so rich that mapmakers across the Mediterranean drew its king holding a nugget of gold. These stories traveled far beyond the deserts and rivers of West Africa. They reached the courts of Europe, the ports of North Africa, and the libraries of distant scholars. For many people who had never seen Africa, the image of Mansa Musa seated with gold in his hand became a symbol of the continent's wealth and power. Yet his greatest legacy was not the gold he gave away. Gold can be spent. Empires can fade. But knowledge endures. The mosques he built became centers of learning. The scholars he supported trained new generations of teachers, judges, and thinkers. The manuscripts copied in Timbuktu preserved ideas that would survive long after the Mali Empire itself declined. Even today, hidden in libraries and family collections across Mali, thousands of these ancient manuscripts remain. They are fragile pages of ink and parchment, yet they carry the voices of a civilization that once flourished along the Niger River. And in many of those stories, the shadow of Mansa Musa still stands. He represents a moment in history when Africa's influence stretched across continents, when caravans carried not only gold but knowledge, and when a ruler understood that the strength of a kingdom lies not only in its wealth, but in the wisdom of its people. To remember Mansa Musa is to remember that history is far larger than the versions we are sometimes taught. It is to recognize that greatness has many homes, and that the achievements of Africa are woven deeply into the story of humanity. Across the centuries, the sands of the Sahara continue to move, covering and uncovering traces of ancient roads once traveled by merchants and pilgrims. Somewhere along those endless routes, long ago, a vast caravan once moved beneath the desert sun. At its center rode an emperor in robes of gold and indigo. A man whose generosity reshaped economies. A ruler whose vision transformed cities. A pilgrim whose faith carried him across continents. A king whose name would never be forgotten. Mansa Musa, the Golden Emperor of Mali.